I got some interesting developments on Robert Saleh, John, and what his role with the Jets is going to be. I mean, we know he's the head coach, but a little more detail on how that's going to go.
And before we dive into that, subscribe to the page, like the video, podcast below in the description.
Robert Saleh is not going to be handling defensive play calling duties with the Jets. Jeff Ulbrich is going to be his defensive coordinator. Saleh is just going to big CEO. Surprised by that?
Yeah, I'm pretty shocked. I part of to me hiring Robert Saleh or any young coach, for that matter, is their expertise and dynamic ability to be a schemer, right? I guess it's easier with an offensive guy. I don't think we've had one offensive coach hired in the last however many cycles that was under like 45 that wasn't immediately a play caller, right? Including older guys like Frank Reich and I guess Bruce Arians is old. But
can I just let me put a little I'll just change it a little bit. You tell me if you agree. I don't think it's necessarily old or young. It's just if I'm hiring you and you have not been a head coach before, it's the coordinators that you assume are going to be coordinators when they become head coaches because that's the thing that got them a head coaching job.
True. But just think of the crew of offensive guys that Saleh's connected to, right? LaFleur, best man at his wedding. Kyle's his guy. McVay, it feels like they're all connected. He's been playing against them, and they would be buddies if they worked together. They're all play callers, right? They're all play callers.
Yeah.
Arthur Smith gets the job. Sirianni to the Eagles. When Doug was hired to the Eagles. Josh McDaniels getting an interview. Like when I think Josh McDaniels, if he's ever taken a head coaching job, the number one thing I'd be hiring Josh to do would be call the plays. And defensively, I just assume Saleh's that on defense. He's just going to implement his defense. And when I saw they hired Jeff Ulbrich, who I used to like in the late 90s on the Niners, and I know Jim Mora always liked, and he seems like just an intense, like good member of the staff, seems a little crazy to me. For like part of being a CEO, I guess the way I think of it is you've understood and done everything else, so it's easier to become the CEO. Like once upon a time, Belichick was a defensive coordinator, right? And then he did that as a head coach, and he implemented his defense. Now, I think Saleh is going to implement the defense that the Niners have been running in the Seattle-style defense. And I guess, obviously, Atlanta under Dan Quinn, like they're speaking the same language, right? Jeff Ulbrich with Dan Quinn has been doing Robert Saleh. They all run the same shit. So it's not like he didn't just hire Dick LeBeau to run the 3-4 or something. But still, like, I have no problem hiring Jeff Ulbrich to be my defensive coordinator. Kyle Shanahan has offensive coordinators. Frank Reich's offensive coordinator just got a head coaching job, yet Frank calls the plays. I don't mind naming the guy. I would have thought Robert Saleh would have called the defensive plays. If he wanted to do this in a couple years, I would maybe understand it. But to me, right off the bat, and I would imagine they talked about this during the interview process, if I was Joe Douglas, I'd want him to be my defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing that makes me think, listen to you talk, is that Robert Saleh belongs more on Pete Carroll's tree than he does on Kyle Shanahan's. He worked for Pete Carroll. He worked for Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan called plays. Pete Carroll didn't. Robert Saleh came away from his experiences. He worked other places too and said, I'm going to be the kind of head coach that doesn't call plays. So I just because of this, I'm going to put him a little more under Pete Carroll's tree because it seems like that's a little bit more of what he's trying to implement.
If you were an owner, would you feel great about a first-time head coach paying $7-8 million that wasn't calling plays?
No, so I wouldn't, just when you put it like that. But I also think this is such an individual thing. Like, I might feel great about it if I sat across from Robert Saleh and he told me why he thinks it's important for him. If I'm calling defense, that means I can't go talk to Sam Darnold as much as I would like. I can't go keep an eye on the offensive line and talk to those guys as much as I'd like. I can't deal with some of the other big picture things as much as I would like. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm with you. I'd go, wait a second, what? Because we watch Tomlin and John Harbaugh, and we're like, so when they win, it's like these guys. But when they lose, we go, what exactly is it that they do? So I wouldn't feel great about it, just generally speaking. But I can't say that for sure. I wouldn't sit down with a guy and go, you know what? I'm sold. Jeff Ulbrich can absolutely run what you run. What's special about you? What got you noticed was your defenses were good. But what made your defenses good was the way you communicated and coached those guys. And yes, I want that for my entire team. I'm convinced. I can see how you would feel good about that. Like, I need a leader for my football locker room to make sure that all Joe Douglas's players reach their full potential, and your value is all that other stuff, which we kind of mock until we, it's easy when you're in it. It's probably the best way to describe. Like, when you work for somebody who's terrible at it, you go, God, if they could, I don't need them to tell me how to get in and out of all the radio breaks. I just need them to be a good leader.
Yeah.
Now, some people can do everything. There's that too, and maybe he hasn't been a head coach, so it's hard to know. But, yeah, you're betting on the guy more than anything else, and that's hard to bet on. It's easy to bet on his ranks. He was number 2 and number 9 in defense back-to-back years. That's easy to bet on.
For example, I think when Vrabel got to the Tennessee Titans, he brought Dean Pease. So it was like, you were hiring me. I was a defensive coordinator, but I'm going to bring in my defensive coordinator. And I think LaFleur was his offensive coordinator. Like, I'm going to bring guys that are going to be good at that job. And ultimately, I think Vrabel, a couple years later, he's now the defensive coordinator. But he brought Dean Pease. If Saleh had brought the equivalent of like Gus Bradley, right, or just someone that had been doing it, he is bringing a guy.
That's a big part of it. You're right.
Has Jeff Ulbrich been a defensive coordinator in the NFL? Like, to me, part of it is that's where Jeff Ulbrich, to me, falls under the category of he was a defensive coordinator, I guess, this year. Yeah, that didn't go well. Now, part of it is because Raheem became the head coach, right? So he got elevated once Quinn got fired.
Yeah. So no,
but
it's a short answer.
He's
really.
never been a defensive coordinator really in his coaching life, even when UCLA.
Who was the DC at UCLA those years?
Mora, was it Mora?
Lou Spanos. So maybe it was Mora.
So it's just do you remember Lou Spanos?
No, my guess is it was Mora.
Yeah, I think it was like a combination of them all. I don't know, man. I think it's a pretty risky move for Saleh to have a guy that's never been a defensive coordinator. Because that wouldn't we say if it was reversed? If Kyle Shanahan, I guess, had named LaFleur or McDaniel his offensive coordinator when he got the job, we would have been like, well, isn't Kyle getting hired to call these plays?
Absolutely, you're right.
It's different. It's different with offense. It's definitely different with offense. But I think the reason Robert Saleh became a head coach wasn't just because Sherman, all these guys were talking about how great a guy he was. It was their defense was good, right? It was their defense was good. And now he's not calling the defense. And as the guy who's making the defensive coordinator, let's just face it, has been a part of a defense that was terrible. I mean, really, really bad.
Yeah. Now,
like that. When all of us watched the Atlanta Falcons over the last several years, it was a joke how bad their defense was. And honestly, every time I was like, God, I'm kind of out on Matt Ryan. Then you watch, like, he's not as bad as I thought.
Maybe they're playing the long game. Like Joe Douglas is like, look, Robert, this defense does not have a lot of talent on it. We traded Jamal Adams. You take over year 2 when we're a little better. We'll fire Ulbrich. I don't want you. If you're coaching this defense year 1, it's going to look bad. Nobody could do anything with this. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, not out of the realm possibility. You know, Ulbrich, San Jose guy.
Oh,
born in San Jose, Gilroy.
What high school?
Live Oak, Morgan Hill.
Morgan Hill. It's San Jose area.
Yeah, went to college in Hawaii.
He went to University of Hawaii.
Yeah, under recruited clearly.
So
third round
one
pick.
thing I'll say about Jeff Ulbrich, I guarantee he can relate to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think people really like him. I mean,
he's the guy that stood up for Raheem Morris, right? Said this guy should be a head coach.
Well, I understand why these guys know each other because he was an assistant coach for Pete Carroll in Seattle when Robert was there with Gus Bradley, and then he's boys with Jim Mora. He's boys with Dan Quinn. He's boys with Saleh. Like, I like his crew. Like, his crew's that kind of West Coast defensive guy, right? When I think Jim Mora, I think Pete Carroll, like Gus Bradley. Like, that's just kind of their – that's like the equivalent of like Kyle, LaFleur, McDaniel, McVay. Like, that's just an older version of that on defense. Yeah. They've made a ton of money, and they've had a lot of success, and they're highly thought of in the league. I'm not trying to act like Jeff Ulbrich doesn't deserve a chance.
No,
but
I totally get what you're saying. You're saying you hire an assistant coach and pay him a lot of money, and the first thing he does is not the thing that he's known for. That's a risk.
Yeah,
and I think that's fair. That's a risk. It might work out. Betting on himself, doing other things well. He's betting on Jeff Ulbrich, but it's a risk.
Yeah.